The kingdom of Nivara was known across the lands for its grand ceremonies, shining towers, and a court that prided itself on beauty, grace, and elegance. Every year the Hall of Ascension hosted the ritual where the Alpha King, Eldrick, reaffirmed his rule and honored those who served the realm. Yet beneath the golden chandeliers and polished stone floors, cruelty and judgment whispered in the corners. Lyra had always known her place. She was an Omega, born quiet, unnoticed, and, by the cruel standards of the nobles, ugly. Her hair was tangled in waves that no comb could tame, her face uneven, her frame small and fragile in a world that celebrated strength and perfection. The nobles often laughed at her behind her back, calling her names that stung more sharply than any blade. On the morning of the grand ceremony, Lyra had been given a task that was meant to humiliate her. The nobles, laughing at their own cleverness, decreed that she would clean the Hall of Ascension while the ceremony took place. They whispered and chuckled as she entered the massive hall carrying a mop, buckets, and a rag. The hall gleamed in sunlight streaming through stained glass windows, casting colored light across the floor. The scent of polished marble mixed with burning candles filled the air. Lyra knelt and began scrubbing, her arms aching, her fingers raw. She felt eyes on her, the weight of their laughter pressing into her back. But she dared not look up. The nobles' voices rang with false cheer as they whispered to one another. She is worse than the dust on the floors. I hope the king notices how low she falls. Their words were sharp, meant to wound, but Lyra had learned to keep her head down, to let the world believe in her insignificance. Yet despite their cruelty, she noticed the details of the hall that others ignored. The tiny carvings in the wooden beams, the faint glimmer in the stone tiles, the way the candles flickered when a breeze passed. She took small comfort in the beauty she could see, even if no one else acknowledged it. The great doors opened with a ceremonial creak, announcing the arrival of the nobles in their flowing robes, sparkling jewelry, and gilded masks. Lyra tried to retreat to the corner, making herself as small as possible. But then the crowd parted and he appeared. Eldrick, the Alpha King of Nivara, stepped into the hall with a presence that silenced the whispers. His armor, black with silver inlays, caught the light, but it was not his appearance that commanded attention. It was the way he moved, deliberate, confident, and impossibly strong, yet with a grace that seemed almost otherworldly. His eyes, sharp and stormy, swept over the hall, and then, to Lyra's astonishment, they fell on her. For a moment, everything froze. The noble whispers faded. She felt her heart hammering as he regarded her, not with mockery, not with judgment, but with curiosity. His gaze was intense, like he was studying her, searching for something hidden beneath her ragged hair and tired expression. Lyra felt her breath catch. She had never been seen like this before. In the court, eyes always skimmed past her or lingered to sneer. But Eldrick's eyes, they held something else, something that made her skin tingle and her heart ache in a way she had never known. The ceremony began, the nobles chanting, the air thick with incense and expectation. Lyra worked silently, scrubbing and polishing, trying to vanish into the stone floors. But fate has a way of pulling the unnoticed into the center of attention. A noble, laughing carelessly, tripped over a golden rug. He stumbled, reaching for the nearest support, and in his panic, knocked over a candle stand. Flames leapt onto the silk drapes, and a hush fell over the hall. Panic spread like wildfire. Lyra didn't think. Instinct took over. She grabbed a bucket of water and rushed to the flames, dousing them before they could spread. Her rag fell, her hands shaking, but the fire was gone. She looked up to find Eldrick at the center of the hall, his eyes wide, his jaw tight with the kind of surprise that made her wonder if he had expected her to fail. The nobles froze, mouths open. None of them had expected the ugly Omega to act with courage. None had imagined her moving faster, thinking clearer than any of them in that moment. Eldrick stepped forward, his gaze still locked on her. The hall was silent except for the crackle of the remaining flames and the distant murmur of shocked courtiers. "You have a skill I did not expect," he said, his voice low and measured but carrying across the hall like a command. "Do not let your courage be wasted on cleaning floors." Lyra blinked. Her heart pounded in disbelief. She had been sent here to be humiliated, yet this man, the Alpha King, was speaking to her as if she mattered. The nobles murmured angrily, whispering to each other, but Eldrick's presence silenced them. There was authority in him that could not be ignored. No one dared speak against his words. Lyra's hands trembled, her eyes wide. I did only what I could," she whispered. Eldric's gaze softened slightly, but only for a heartbeat. "And yet it is enough," he said. "Stay. You will not leave this hall until I say so." The nobles gasped. Some laughed bitterly, some scowled. Their cruel plans had backfired. The joke they had prepared for the Omega had been interrupted by both her bravery and the king's attention. Lyra knelt there, caught between fear and wonder. She had never imagined that someone like Eldric would notice her, let alone command that she remain. Yet beneath the fear, a spark of hope ignited, a feeling she thought had long died in her. The rest of the ceremony continued, but Lyra's thoughts were elsewhere. She could not stop thinking about Eldric's eyes, the way he seemed to see through the layers of dust, mockery, and insignificance that had defined her life. He had noticed her, truly noticed her. As the final candles were extinguished and the nobles departed, whispering and shaking their heads, Eldric lingered. He approached Lyra, his presence overwhelming yet oddly comforting. "Come," he said. "You will learn that courage and honesty are worth more than appearances in my court, and I intend to see what else you can do." Lyra rose slowly, unsure of what this meant. The hall, once a place of humiliation, now felt like a threshold to something new, something dangerous, mysterious, and yet undeniably thrilling. Hook. As she followed Eldric to the inner chambers of the palace, Lyra caught a glimpse of his hand. Upon his skin was a faint glowing mark that pulsed like a heartbeat, a secret, a curse, or a power she could not yet understand. Something told her that the moment she touched it, her life would change forever. The Palace of Nivara was a place of whispered secrets, long corridors and shadows that seemed to hold their own memories. The walls gleamed with polished stone, painted tapestries depicting the kingdom's victories and golden sconces that cast a warm glow over the silent halls. Lyra walked behind the Alpha King, Eldric, her hands still trembling from the chaos of the Hall of Ascension. She tried to keep her head down, afraid of his presence, yet she could not resist stealing glances at him. He moved with quiet authority, each step deliberate, each motion precise, yet there was something almost fragile about the way he held himself, like he carried the weight of the entire kingdom on his shoulders and hid a private sorrow behind his iron gaze. "You may think the court will always mock you," Eldric said, his voice low, carrying across the empty hall. "They will try to make you small. But courage cannot be hidden. Not from me." Lyra swallowed hard, unsure how to respond. No one had ever spoken to her like this, with respect and quiet acknowledgement. Fear and disbelief battled with the small spark of hope growing inside her chest. I only did what I thought was right," she murmured, her voice barely audible. "That is precisely why you survived today," Eldric said. He paused and glanced at her, his eyes sharp yet unreadable. "The court will never understand it, and they may resent you for it. But I will not let them harm you further." Lyra's heart skipped a beat. She had been humiliated countless times before, sent to the kitchens, to the stables, to clean floors and sweep corridors as a joke. But this was different. She felt a strange mix of fear and longing. She had been brought low to prove nothing, and yet, here she was, being lifted by the very hand that had once seemed untouchable. They arrived at a quiet chamber near the heart of the palace. Candles burned softly, casting shadows across the walls. Eldric gestured for her to sit. Lyra obeyed, unsure of what to expect. "You will remain in the palace," Eldric said finally. "Not as a servant, not as a subject. You will stay as my Omega." Lyra's breath caught. The words were strange, unfamiliar, and yet they carried a weight she could not ignore. Her mind raced, thinking of the whispers, the laughter of the nobles, the scorn she had endured for years. She wanted to speak, to refuse, but the truth was undeniable. She felt drawn to him, and she could not explain why. You mean," she stammered, her voice trembling. "You mean, I am not being sent away?" Eldric's gaze did not waver. "You are under my protection," he said simply. "No harm shall come to you while I am king, and your presence, it may yet be of use to this kingdom." Lyra's thoughts spun. Protection, importance, recognition. She had never known such words could belong to her. And yet, beneath the awe and disbelief, a flicker of unease stirred. To remain so close to the Alpha King meant danger as well as opportunity. She would be watched, judged, and tested in ways she could not yet imagine. The days that followed were a mixture of tension, curiosity, and small discoveries. Lyra was given a small chamber near the palace library, a place she could call her own. Yet even there she felt the eyes of the court. Nobles whispered in the corridors, their voices dripping with envy and suspicion. But in Eldric's presence she felt safe, as if no power in the kingdom could touch her. Eldric himself remained an enigma. He did not seek her out often, but when he did, it was never casual. Every word, every glance seemed loaded with meaning, testing her, teasing her, and yet inviting her closer to the truths he kept hidden. One evening, as twilight fell over the palace, Lyra found herself in the library, a place of silence and forgotten knowledge. She was brushing dust from a shelf of old scrolls when Eldric appeared behind her, his presence sudden yet soft, like a shadow that knew no fear. "You have a curious mind," he said, his voice low, almost intimate. Not many would notice the details hidden in these old scrolls. Most are blind to history unless it serves them. Lyra looked up, startled, her hands trembling slightly. I like to read," she admitted. "It helps me understand things I cannot see in the world." Eldric's gaze softened, yet a shadow lingered behind his eyes. "The world is cruel," he said. "It rewards the cunning, the beautiful, the strong. Yet there are those like you, who see what others cannot. That is a rare gift." Lyra's heart swelled at the words. No one had ever called her a gift. She had always been the target of ridicule, the subject of mockery. And now this man, this powerful, feared Alpha King, was telling her that she mattered. As the days turned into weeks, Lyra discovered more about the king. Eldric was not merely a ruler. He carried the burden of a family curse, one that few dared speak of openly. Whispers in the palace hinted at strange marks on his skin, odd illnesses, and the shadow of loss that always lingered around him. Lyra, observant as ever, noticed the faint glow on the back of his hand one evening, a subtle, pulsing light that seemed alive. Curiosity and fear battled within her. She wanted to ask, but something in Eldric's expression stopped her. He was proud, guarded, and the hint of vulnerability in his eyes was fleeting. Yet she could not tear her gaze away. The mark seemed to call to her, as if it were a secret meant only for her. Their interactions became a delicate dance of words, glances, and subtle movements. Eldric tested her courage, her wit, and her patience. Lyra, in turn, learned to hold her own, to respond with quiet defiance when needed, and to recognize the moments when vulnerability was a strength rather than a weakness. One night, during a storm that rattled the palace windows, Eldric called for her. The corridors were empty, the halls echoing with the sound of rain and thunder. He led her to a secluded chamber, where candlelight flickered against the stone walls. "Lyra," he said, his voice unsteady, carrying a weight she had not heard before. "The curse that runs in my blood. It isolates me. Those who try to deceive me or manipulate me suffer greatly. It is not cruelty. It is protection and punishment for those unworthy." Lyra nodded slowly, understanding the gravity of his words. I do not wish to deceive you," she said. "I only wish to do what is right." Eldric studied her for a long moment. "It may be enough," he said finally. "But you must understand. My world is not safe for you. Not yet, and yet, I find myself wishing you were not afraid." Lyra felt her chest tighten. The weight of his words pressed on her, heavy yet intoxicating. Fear, longing, and a strange, unnameable desire swirled within her. She had been sent to clean floors as a joke, to be humiliated by a court that prized beauty above all, and yet now she stood here in the heart of the palace, with the Alpha King's attention and trust. Hook. As she reached out to brush a candle aside, her hand accidentally touched the faint glowing mark on Eldric's wrist. A shiver ran through both of them, sharp and electric, and the candlelight flickered wildly. Lyra pulled back instantly, heart pounding. Eldric's eyes widened in a rare moment of shock, and for the first time she saw uncertainty in his gaze. Something had awakened, something powerful, mysterious, and dangerous. And in that instant Lyra knew her life, her destiny, and her heart had changed forever. The palace of Navarra had grown quiet, yet tension lingered in the air like a storm waiting to break. Lyra had been learning the rhythms of the court, the subtle dance of respect and fear, of whispers and hidden glances. She moved through the halls with a cautious grace, observing, learning, and slowly discovering the depths of the king's world. Eldric's presence lingered like a shadow that both comforted and unnerved her. He did not seek her out constantly, But when he appeared, it was always with purpose. A glance, a question, a quiet command, all of it tested her, shaped her, and forced her to confront her own fears. Lyra had never been trained for this life of intrigue, yet she discovered that courage could be learned, and trust could grow, even in the shadows of power. One afternoon, as sunlight filtered through the stained glass windows of the eastern hall, Eldrick summoned Lyra. She found him standing before a large map of the kingdom, runes etched along its edges and faint golden threads running across the parchment. His brow was furrowed, his eyes dark with thought. "Lyra," he said, his voice steady but edged with tension, "there is something you must know about the curse that runs in my blood. It is not a simple spell or a fleeting hex. It is tied to desire, to fear, to the very essence of connection. It tests those who are closest to me, seeing if they can endure without faltering." Lyra listened intently, her heart pounding. She had seen glimpses of the curse, its effects on Eldrick's temper, his moments of isolation, and the strange glowing mark on his wrist. But to hear him speak of it openly made the danger feel real, closer, and impossible to ignore. "What happens if someone falters?" she asked softly. Eldrick's gaze darkened. "They are consumed by the shadows. Their intentions are twisted. The bond between us is tested and weakness is punished. That is why the court fears me, and why so many have tried to control or manipulate me over the years." Lyra's fingers trembled, but she reached out, placing her hand lightly on the map. "Then we must be strong," she said. "Together. We cannot let it divide us. We cannot let it win." Eldrick looked at her, a mixture of surprise and admiration in his stormy eyes. "You understand more than most," he said quietly. "Most would see only the danger, only the shadows. You see beyond them. That is rare, and it may be the key to ending this." Over the next days, Lyra trained alongside Eldrick, learning to sense the subtle shifts of the curse, to notice the ways it manipulated emotions and perceptions. They practiced in the quiet chambers of the palace, moving as one, speaking in whispers, testing their trust and strength. Each day the bond between them deepened, not through declarations or grand gestures, but through shared trials and understanding. Yet the curse was cunning. It began to manifest in ways neither of them expected. Shadows that seemed to cling to Eldrick would flicker toward her, whispering doubts in her mind, questioning her worth, her courage, and her intentions. Lyra fought back with every ounce of resolve she had, clinging to the trust she had built with the king. Eldrick, in turn, confronted his own fears. The fear of losing control, of harming those he cared for, of being betrayed by those closest to him. One evening, as twilight bathed the palace in golden shadow, Eldrick led Lyra to the northern tower. The wind howled around them, rattling the shutters and sending cold drafts down the spiral staircase. At the top of the tower was a small chamber, its windows looking out over the city below. Candles flickered on the stone floor, casting dancing shadows that seemed alive. "The curse grows stronger when desire is tested," Eldrick said, his voice low. "It will show you visions, temptations, fears, moments that could tear trust apart. You must remain steadfast. You must not falter." Lyra nodded, determination hardening within her chest. "I will not falter," she said. "I will face it, whatever comes." As if in response, the shadows in the room thickened, twisting into shapes that were both familiar and strange. Lyra saw illusions of herself, mocked, ridiculed, abandoned. She saw Eldrick, alone and in pain, suffering because of her failure. The visions were vivid, almost real, and a cold shiver ran down her spine. Eldrick stepped close, his hand brushing hers. "Do not fear what you see," he said. "It is a test. Focus on what is real, our bond, our courage, our truth." Lyra took a deep breath and stepped forward, confronting the illusions. She spoke aloud, her voice steady despite the fear curling in her chest. "I am not defined by the shadows. I am not defined by fear. I stand with you, King, and nothing can change that." The shadows shrieked and twisted, but slowly they began to retreat, their forms dissolving into nothingness. The chamber seemed to exhale, the air lighter, the wind less harsh. Eldrick's mark pulsed softly, a reminder of the power that still lingered, but also of the bond they had forged through trust and courage. "You did well," Eldrick said, his voice tinged with both relief and awe. "Many would have faltered. You did not." Lyra felt a surge of pride and warmth, but also a lingering fear. The curse was not gone, it was merely pushed back. There would be more trials, more shadows, more tests of courage and trust. But for now, they had survived together. Over the following weeks, their connection grew stronger. Eldrick began to confide in her, sharing fragments of his past, of the family burden that had haunted him for generations. Lyra listened, never judging, offering insight and quiet support. Their conversations were filled with unspoken understanding, glances that carried meaning and moments of shared silence that spoke louder than words. Yet the court did not rest. Whispers of jealousy and fear spread through the halls, as nobles sought to exploit any weakness, any sign that the curse might strike again. Lyra's position became both a shield and a target. She was no longer merely an omega to be mocked. She was a figure of influence, seen as both a threat and a mystery. One night, as she walked the corridors alone, she felt a cold presence behind her. Shadows moved unnaturally, curling along the walls, whispering threats and doubts. Lyra's heart raced, but she remembered Eldrick's lessons, the strength they had forged together. "Show yourself," she called, her voice steady despite the fear. "I will not be afraid." From the darkness emerged a figure, a minor court magician who had been loyal to no one but ambition. His eyes glinted with malice, and dark energy pulsed from his hands. "You think you can stand with the king?" he sneered. "You are nothing. The curse will claim him and you will be forgotten." Lyra squared her shoulders, her resolve hardening. "You are wrong," she said firmly. "The king and I are stronger than your shadows. We stand together, and we will not falter." The magician lunged, sending a wave of dark energy toward her. Lyra closed her eyes, focusing on her courage, her trust in Eldrick and the bond they had built. At the same time, Eldrick appeared behind her, his own power flaring as he deflected the attack and bound the magician's energy. Together they forced him to retreat, the shadows dissipating into the cold night air. Eldrick turned to Lyra, his stormy eyes softened by awe and admiration. "You have faced the curse and its followers with bravery," he said. "I could not have done it without you." Lyra smiled faintly, her chest still racing. "We are in this together," she replied. "Whatever comes, we face it as one." Hook. Yet even as they stood together, the mark on Eldrick's hand pulsed with a faint, dangerous glow. Lyra felt it calling, a subtle reminder that the curse was not yet fully broken. Somewhere in the shadows, older and darker forces stirred, watching, waiting, and testing their bond. The true challenge had only just begun, and Lyra realized that to save the king and perhaps herself, they would need every ounce of courage, trust, and love they had forged together. The days after the partial lifting of the curse were tense in the palace of Navarra. The nobles watched Eldrick and Lyra with a mixture of suspicion, fear, and envy. Whispers followed her wherever she went, painting her as a manipulative force who had ensnared the Alpha King. Lyra tried to ignore them, but the weight of their judgment pressed heavily against her chest. Eldrick, however, remained distant yet attentive. He did not scold her for the murmurs of the court, nor did he leave her to fend for herself. He walked beside her silently, a silent shield against the venomous gossip, and his presence alone forced even the boldest nobles to lower their eyes. But there was tension in his gaze, a worry he could not hide. The curse that ran through his blood was not fully gone. Shadows lingered over his every decision, and Lyra felt the pull of it each time she was near him. One evening, as the crimson sun sank behind the palace towers, Eldrick summoned Lyra to the upper balcony overlooking the city. The sky was streaked with gold and violet, the clouds drifting lazily like spirits in the wind. Lyra's heart beat faster as she followed him, sensing that tonight would be different. "You have been patient," Eldrick said, his voice quiet against the rustle of the wind. "But patience alone will not protect you. The court will test you. They will try to push you away, humiliate you, and turn even me against you. You must be ready." Lyra nodded, though fear curled in her stomach like a living thing. "And I will do my best," she said. "I cannot promise I will succeed, but I will not run." Eldrick studied her, his eyes dark and stormy, filled with a mixture of admiration and concern. "Do you understand why the curse exists?" he asked. "It was meant to guard me from those who would harm me, from those who would exploit love and loyalty. But it is cruel too. It isolates me, keeps me from trust, and leaves me lonely even in my victories." Lyra's fingers trembled as she reached out to touch his arm. The king flinched slightly but did not pull away. "I do not wish to deceive you," she whispered. "I only want to be here honestly and help however I can." Eldric's lips curved faintly, almost a smile but shadowed by a sadness that ran deep. "Honesty is rare in my world," he said.
And yet,
"It may be enough." That night, as the moon rose high over the palace towers, a rival noble named Varric plotted in secret. He had long resented Lyra, mocking her when she was sent to clean the Hall of Ascension. Now, seeing her close to the king, he vowed to remove her from the palace and, perhaps, to strike at Eldric himself. Varric gathered a small group of conspirators and prepared a ritual meant to bind Eldric's power, making him vulnerable and forcing him to exile Lyra. Dark magic seeped through the shadows, and the air grew cold, heavy with foreboding. The palace slept unaware except for Lyra, who had been drawn to the upper corridors by a strange sense of danger. As she moved quietly, she noticed the faint glow of magic in the hallways, a twisting, unnatural light that made her skin prickle. Following it, she stumbled upon Varric's secret gathering. Fear surged through her, but so did resolve. She could not allow the king to be harmed, and she would not run from danger. Stepping forward, Lyra's voice rang clear. "Stop," she called, and the conspirators froze. "You will not harm him." "Not while I am here." Varric laughed, a cruel, sharp sound. "And what can a mere Omega do against the Alpha King's enemies?" He sneered. "You are nothing. Just a joke, as you always have been." Lyra's chest tightened, but she stood taller. She may have been underestimated for her appearance, but she had courage the court could never imagine. She focused her mind, remembering the lessons she had learned from observing Eldric, from understanding the curse. Using her insight, she disrupted the ritual, not with magic of her own, but with careful timing, quick thinking, and knowledge of the artifacts the conspirators used. The hall erupted in chaos as the ritual backfired. Varric and his companions staggered, caught in the very magic they had summoned. Eldric appeared behind Lyra, moving like a shadow, his presence sudden and commanding. With a wave of his hand and a surge of his power, the conspirators were driven back, defeated but alive. Eldric turned to Lyra, his eyes wide and unguarded. You intervened," he said, a mixture of astonishment and admiration in his voice. "You saved me." Lyra looked down, unsure how to respond. I did what I could," she said softly. "I didn't want anyone to get hurt." Eldric's gaze softened, and for the first time the Alpha King's mask of unshakable control slipped. "You are no ordinary Omega," he said. "You are extraordinary." The palace was quiet again, but the tension lingered. The nobles would speak of this night for years, their whispers now tinged with fear and awe. Lyra, however, felt a strange mixture of exhaustion and exhilaration. She had faced danger, confronted the shadows of the court, and stood by the king's side, not as a servant, not as a joke, but as someone who mattered. As the candles flickered in the hallway, Eldric took her hand, a rare gesture of trust. "You have strength," he said, his voice almost gentle. "Not just courage, but the strength to stand against darkness, to protect what is precious. That is a gift few possess." Lyra felt warmth bloom in her chest. She had always felt small, invisible and powerless. Yet here she was, recognized for her bravery, acknowledged for her heart. The king, who bore the weight of a cursed bloodline, saw her, truly saw her, and it changed something inside her. Hook. But the night was not over. As they turned to leave the hall, the faint glowing mark on Eldric's hand pulsed brighter than before, casting an eerie light across the walls. Shadows twisted unnaturally, and Lyra felt a chill run down her spine. Something in the palace had awakened, something older and darker than any conspiracy she had faced. And as she looked at Eldric, she realized that their journey together was only beginning, and that the curse they had barely touched held secrets far more dangerous than either of them had imagined. The palace of Navarra was quiet that night, yet the air was heavy with anticipation. A storm of magic and shadows had begun to stir, the lingering remnants of the curse pulsing through every corridor. Lyra stood at the center of the great hall, her heart racing, hands trembling, but her eyes steady. She was no longer the Omega who had cleaned floors in shame. She had been tested, scorned, and finally recognized, not for her appearance, but for her courage, her intelligence, and her unwavering heart. Eldric approached her, his presence commanding, yet familiar, like the shadow of a mountain that sheltered the valley beneath. The glow of his mark flickered faintly, pulsing in rhythm with his heartbeat. "Lyra," he said, his voice low and steady. "Tonight we face the curse together. If we fail, the kingdom suffers. If we succeed, we may finally find freedom." Lyra nodded, a mixture of fear and resolve tightening her chest. She had seen the darkness of the curse, glimpsed its power in the failed ritual of Varric and the lingering shadows that clung to Eldric's family line. Yet she was no longer afraid, because she did not stand alone. She had earned the king's trust, and more than that, she had discovered the courage she had never known she possessed. They began the journey toward the heart of the palace, where an ancient chamber lay hidden beneath layers of stone and forgotten spells. The chamber was a relic of Eldric's ancestors, etched with runes that glowed faintly in the dim candlelight. Shadows twisted along the walls, reaching for them as if testing their will. "The curse is older than anyone remembers," Eldric said softly, breaking the silence. "It feeds on fear, suspicion, and betrayal. It isolates me from those I love. Many have tried to lift it, but none succeeded. It will test us, body, mind, and heart. We must face it as one." Lyra swallowed hard, her throat tight, but she reached for his hand. "Then we face it together," she said. Her voice, though small, carried a strength that surprised even her. "Whatever comes, we do it together." Eldric's eyes softened, the storm of power in them dimming for a moment. "Together," he echoed, and in that word a bond was sealed deeper than any law or decree. The chamber's entrance loomed ahead. As they stepped inside, the air shifted. Shadows coalesced into forms whispering threats, doubts, and fears. The curse manifested as illusions, faces of loved ones long lost, memories twisted into pain, and visions of failure meant to break their resolve. Lyra felt a chill, but she held Eldric's hand tightly. "They cannot touch us," she whispered. "We are stronger than this. We are honest, and we are brave." The shadows hissed, clawing at their senses, but Eldric's presence grounded her. He moved with grace, deflecting illusions with the strength of his will, yet he did not move alone. Lyra's courage became a shield, her honesty a light that pierced the darkness. Together, they walked deeper into the chamber, confronting every fear the curse threw at them. At the center of the room lay a stone pedestal, etched with the oldest runes of Navarra. The mark on Eldric's hand glowed brighter, responding to the energy in the chamber. "This is it," Eldric said. "The heart of the curse. It will try to divide us, make us doubt each other, make us falter. Do not give it power." Lyra's eyes met his. She saw not just a king, but a man weighed down by generations of suffering, a man whose soul longed for trust, for connection, for love. "I will not let it divide us," she said firmly. "We have faced everything together. We are stronger than its shadows." As they approached the pedestal, the curse struck with full force. Shadows swirled violently, forming shapes of those who had mocked, betrayed, and scorned them. Lyra saw faces she recognized. The nobles, Varric, even reflections of herself. Distorted and cruel, fear surged, but she focused on Eldric. She drew on every lesson, every moment of courage, and every truth they had shared. "Trust me," Eldric whispered. "I trust you." Lyra nodded, heart pounding. She stepped forward, placing her hand on the pedestal alongside Eldric's. The glow from his mark flared, mingling with the courage that radiated from her. The shadows shrieked, twisting and writhing, but they could not penetrate the bond forming between them. A wave of energy surged through the chamber, shaking the walls and rattling the candles. The curse, sensing it could not break their unity, lashed out one final time, projecting the deepest fears of both Lyra and Eldric. Lyra saw Eldric fall alone in battle, the kingdom in ruin. Eldric saw Lyra abandoned, powerless and suffering, but neither faltered. Together they closed their eyes, focused on the trust and honesty between them, the courage and compassion they shared. The energy shifted. Shadows screamed. then dissolved into nothingness. The runes on the pedestal glowed brilliantly, absorbing the curse, and then dimmed as if the chamber itself exhaled in relief. Lyra opened her eyes and saw Eldrick standing beside her, breathless but alive. He looked at her, awe and something softer in his eyes. You did it," he said, his voice breaking slightly. "We did it. Together." Lyra smiled, tears pricking her eyes. "Together," she repeated. For the first time, she felt whole. She was no longer the mocked Omega. She was a partner, a confidant, and a force of strength. The palace, once a place of judgment and cruelty, now felt alive. The shadows had retreated, the whispers of the court silenced by the demonstration of true courage and trust. Eldrick turned to the doors, motioning for Lyra to follow. When they stepped into the grand hall, the nobles were waiting. Their expressions were a mix of awe, fear, and disbelief. They had heard of the challenge, seen the aftermath, but witnessing the bond between Eldrick and Lyra was something no rumor could capture. Eldrick raised his hand, and the hall fell silent. "This woman," he said, his voice firm and commanding, "is no longer to be mocked, belittled, or disregarded. She is brave, honest, and loyal. She stands by me as my partner, not because of appearance, but because of heart and spirit. Let all of Navarra remember that courage, honesty, and trust are greater than beauty, wealth, or title." Lyra's heart swelled as the nobles bowed, some reluctantly, others with genuine respect. For the first time, she felt seen, honored not for how she looked, but for who she was. Eldrick's hand found hers, and together they walked toward the balcony overlooking the city. The night sky stretched endlessly above, the stars shining like scattered diamonds. The curse that had haunted Eldrick for generations had been lifted, not by power alone, but by trust, courage, and the bond between two hearts willing to face the shadows together. Eldrick turned to Lyra, his stormy eyes softening. "You have changed me," he said quietly. "I was bound by fear and by this curse, unable to trust or love freely. But you showed me that I am not alone, that strength can come in many forms." Lyra's lips curved in a gentle smile. "And you have changed me," she replied. "You showed me that courage matters more than fear, and that even the smallest among us can make a difference." They stood together in silence, the wind sweeping around them, carrying away the remnants of shadows and whispers. For the first time, the palace felt like a home, a place of hope rather than mockery, a place where trust and loyalty could flourish. Hook. Yet as they looked out over Navarra, Lyra noticed a faint shimmer in the distant mountains. Something ancient and unseen stirred there, a reminder that while the curse had been lifted, the world beyond the palace walls held mysteries and dangers yet unknown. And in that moment, both Lyra and Eldrick realized that their story was only beginning, bound not just by the events of the past, but by the promise of trials, courage, and love to come.